It is Rayfe, and this is the XP Billionaires podcast. Joining me today are the wonderful co-hosts that you guys have gotten so used to at this point. I've got Irene Rogue and Sky Knight here. All right, Irene, how are you guys? How are you doing today?
Not bad, though having some difficulty accessing my keyboard. There's feet on it. Melon.
Fair enough.
Put them on your cushion. That's what the cushion is for. And she's like, no, I'm gonna hit the shift key.
You need a poking stick is what you need.
That won't go well for me.
But the feet will be off the keyboard.
Somehow.
Yeah. All right. Sky, how are you today?
Oh, I'm good.
Excellent. No random animal-related stories for you?
Well, no.
No. All right, fair enough.
If there was, there would be a problem.
I suppose, although I appreciate you not bringing me into that equation, so I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, fun fact, listeners, Rafe's actually really allergic to melon, and whenever he comes to stay here, he has to take a lot of medication.
It is beyond true how honest that statement is. All right, well, without further ado, I think we're just going to dive right in this week. Before we start, let's hear something very special.
It's time for another good idea, bad idea.
And thank you, Mr. Monotone. All right. Good idea, bad idea. Super excited. I love these. I think these are a lot of fun. Because it's a chance to be both happy and sad/angry at the same time. So I hope you'll join us on this journey of multiple emotions. So for this week, we're going to have a very, very, very long, and I have a feeling it's going to be a very heated discussion. So in order to advance a story or provide challenges for players in RPGs, developers give life to the dungeons. What started with pen and paper has been translated into the digital medium and comes in more variations than I think I can count. So like 6. But
you can only count to 6? Okay, Rafe, we got to get you into math again.
I could use it. But yeah, so basically you can have a simple maze with various twists and turns. You can include puzzles or advancement mechanics, like finding a key for a locked door. Of course, you riddle these dungeons with treasures, traps, and/or enemies. When done right, the dungeon can really enhance the experience of your gameplay as well as your story, especially if there really is a good connection to that story. Unfortunately, this is not always possible, and some dungeon designs can either be tedious or even detrimental to the overall gaming experience. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the good and the bad when it comes to dungeon design. I think we're gonna hit a few nerves today, so I'm looking forward to it. So we are going to start today with Irene. So let us get your good idea. So what is a good dungeon design for you?
So I'm actually going to go with something a little different for this dungeon design thing, because it got me thinking, like, what area, like, really helped tell the story, helped really set the tone, helped advance everything? Like, what area design did I find very impactful when it came to actually conveying, like, the world that the characters are in? And I thought, and I had to eventually land on something not necessarily in the RPG genre, but really, I think, hammered that home. And that was Heavenly Host Elementary School from Corpse Party. So it's not an RPG in the strictest sense, but the way the map was done for this House of Never-Ending Nightmares was perfect for the story it wanted to tell. So the central conceit of Heavenly Host is that it's a closed space from which nobody can escape. And it slowly drives the inhabitants mad. And the way it's executed in the game only enhances this claustrophobic, yet somehow sprawling feeling, because the school will constantly reconfigure itself. It will cut you off from your friends and force you into encounters with its more violent denizens. And while it also operates as a sort of parallel dimension, where you and your friends could actually occupy the same room at the same time and be completely unaware of each other, you're basically beholden to the will of this building that has been made manifest through rancor, malice, and vengeance. And as frightening as the events of Corpse Party was, I think without the masterful work to carefully build Heavenly Host into this oppressive atmosphere, it wouldn't have been nearly as effective. And you have to remember, like, these screens were like, they weren't, 3-dimensional. They were, 2D top-down view screens with like where you could tell like certain sections of the floor had collapsed, and that would mean that you couldn't continue on in that direction without hurting yourself. So your characters would be forced to turn back. But because there's no escape and the school is constantly sort of like cutting you off from one area while opening up others and sort of corralling you where it wants you to go, it's a very much this like living organism that they managed to create, and it really helped hammer home the oppressive atmosphere in the game and how hopeless the situation the characters found themselves in. Because honestly, as you progress through the game, it becomes increasingly clear that the best they can hope for is to die of thirst.
Wow.
Damn.
Yeah. In fact, your characters at the end of the first game are the first people to ever actually successfully leave Heavenly Host Elementary School. Everyone else died. And I won't get into it because it's a massive spoiler, but there's a reason that their deaths are much more tragic than just the circumstances would lead them to be. Like, a lot of them are brutal and violent and terrible and painful, and the spirits there never really rest afterwards. They're trapped there forever. It's Heavenly Host itself is just this really excellently designed space. Whereas, and at the end of the game, actually, in the final chapter, rather than being cut off and like the space being like mercurial, it actually solidifies and you're able to explore the entirety of the building. So all of the various areas that they had built up separately come together and form a conjoined, cohesive whole. It's very good. Very well done.
No, definitely. It sounds like they really put some thought into it. So that's no, perfect. That's really good. I mean, you're right. It's not a traditional RPG in its sense, but it really is a dungeon in and of itself. So yeah, no, that's a great shot.
I really loved those games, and part of that was because Heavenly Host was so oppressive, and they did an excellent job with the design of it to make it that way.
Okay, so let's shift gears now. Let's get you go from happy to angry, and let's talk about your bad idea for dungeon design. Have at it.
It's a bad idea. Monstro from Kingdom Hearts. Fuck that whale. Fuck it, like, into the sun. I hate that thing. It's so easy to get lost, and all the rooms look the same. And then, until you get the double jump ability, if you fall down, you have to backtrack, and then you're back at the beginning of the dungeon because you made a wrong turn somewhere. So now you have to go back in and double back again, and then one of those stupid fucking ghost heartless knocks you off the platform, and you can't jump back up, so you backtrack again, and all the rooms look the same. It's the worst.
So basically one of those dungeons where you can almost get caught up in an endless loop where everything looks the same, so you end up taking the same direction because you can't tell the difference between anything, and you just go around in circles for ages.
Over and over, like, I think I played Kingdom Hearts 1 like 10 times, and I'm only now able to sort of figure out my way through Monstro, but not because of memory, but because I know the tricks now. Like, I'm onto its shit. So like it can't fuck me up anymore. And then when you get like, and here's the biggest thing that bugs me. When you get double jump, it's almost worse. Because then you can get anywhere. And when you get anywhere, yeah, you see where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah.
Right? Areas that you couldn't access before, where you would access along a linear path, are now suddenly you can there's like 5 entrances to every goddamn room. So you can literally just like wander in circles forever because all the rooms looked the same. Fuck that whale.
I think this is going to be a theme. We will get back to this.
No. I hated that whale so goddamn much. And like the area wasn't even that interesting visually. It kind of looked like the insides of Monstro were like fleshy and purple, but they were covered in like spots. Like he had some sort of like inside chicken pox. like, blue and green and all sorts of different weird colors, and like it was gross. The inside of Monstro was gross. Like, you could tell that they had something to work with from the mouth because it actually looked like, what came out of the Disney movie. And then it was like the inside of somebody's like spoiled meat nightmares.
Gross.
Delicious.
Right? It was awful, and you got lost, and oh my god, they brought Monstro back for, I think, for Chain of Memories, if I'm not mistaken. In fact, I'm looking it up right now because it bothers me so much that Chain of Memories.
Well, you talk about hitting a nerve, Rafe.
I that was my goal.
Yes!
That's what I wanted.
Monstro made it a second appearance in Chain of Memories. It was an egregious enough sin in the first fucking game, and then they had to put it in again. Ugh! At least in Chain of Memories, the actual way to get around was obvious, but again, you're in like this like boring purple, like speckled, gross, like just Monstro can like sail amongst the stars forever, and I hope he sails straight into a fucking sun.
Well, I'll let you simmer down for a bit. We'll move on to my choices for dungeon designs. So we'll start with my good idea, of course. For my good idea, I have chosen the old schoolhouse from The Legend of Heroes: Trails of Cold Steel. I realize I'm talking about this game a lot on the podcast right now, but really, this is my modern life right now. If I'm not at work or like watching TV, this is what I'm doing a lot of the time. So here's the thing. You have this old schoolhouse that's basically been there since the founding of Thor's military academy, with floors that are never the same when you visit them again. Surely that seems really strange and out of place, but for Sarah Valstein, the intrepid instructor for Class 7, it's a challenge. As a matter of fact, during the Class 7's orientation, she drops them in this place and tells them to find their way out, just to see what these students could do. But at that point, the class decided that this is a mystery they wanted to solve. So it became one of the central points during your studies at Thor's when you worked out doing your field studies. So mechanically through the game, you'd basically clear an entire floor each month during your free time. There were 7 floors in total, and each floor had their own interesting mechanics. So for example, just to get through them, one dungeon or one floor would have, switches to rise or lower the water level, or one would have bridges that could only be extended one way or another. So there was a lot of ways for you to get around and interact with the areas. It was a great spot to do some grinding. And trust me, it eventually tells you when you need to grind a bit. I tried doing a boss fight on like the 6th or 7th floor, and it was like I am very underleveled, so I went to do some grinding on it. But none of the floors felt long or unnecessary. It felt very well integrated into the story, and it became partly the final dungeon for the game. It wasn't the end of the game, but it was the final actual dungeon area. It was the mystery of the old schoolhouse finally solved. So that was a really, really great thing. It added a little excitement to some of the more fetchy side quests you were doing during your free time. And yeah, like I was saying, for the end of the game, the significance to what you find down there, just awesome. That was amazing. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, he just doesn't want to go into the specifics because hella spoilers.
Oh yeah, but trust me, what's down there, totally worth it in the second game.
Well, it's interesting that we both picked schools, but for very different reasons.
We all picked schools. More on that later.
Holy shit, we did! Oh my god. We all picked schools, but for different reasons.
Yeah. Well, that's your hint for what Sky's good idea is going to be. So, yeah, you guys can play the guessing game on that one and see if you're right. What do you win? Well, nothing. Sorry. All right, let's go on to my bad idea. Now, my bad idea is more of a concept rather than a dungeon specifically. And it comes from what I've done based on my research, most of the games in the Wild Arms series. Now, I've only actually interacted with Wild Arms 2. I've played that one, and I watched Sky play a lot of Wild Arms 5. But I did a little digging, and from what it looks like, it is pretty common in other titles in the series as well. What happens here is that in order to reach the final dungeon in the game, four generals usually stand in your way, and they've each been situated in their own fairly long tower dungeons. Each dungeon is, as I said, long, but it's also filled with its own different puzzles, which really seem to be more than the usual busy work. The big issue here for me is that you could tackle these four dungeons in any order you wanted to, but the encounters didn't seem to be scaled, making the next dungeon just a little easier and easier. So you weren't even gaining all this enough experience to really think it's making a difference. So it just added so much pointless busy work to extend the length of the game. There's really no need for it. It was an artificial lengthening of the game. You could have had one tower with save point, plot fight with a general, save point, plot fight with a general, that kind of thing that you could do just as you progress. You could have just made it a larger tower with scaling enemies to make that progression. It's just not something I think that was executed really well. I don't know specifically if this was the case in Wild Arms 5, for example, but in Wild Arms 2, like the midway points, the final points, the maps were identical. There were parts of the game it's just like I've been exactly in this place before, and yet I'm supposed to be in a different tower. There was no sense of differentiation between them, and that really took away from it for me.
And see, I really liked the four towers and the build up to the generals because I got really emotionally invested in their destruction by the end. And actually, Judica, his like the ending sequence in his tower in Wild Arms 2 sticks with me to this day because it was dramatic, that's for sure.
Well, and it's not to say there weren't good points about them. Like, it was what I found when I was playing Wild Arms 5 is it felt really repetitive. Like, yeah, the towers weren't exactly the same in that game, but you were doing the same sort of stuff. They were all towers. There's, the general at the top. It felt artificial.
I mean, yeah, I wasn't ready for the game to end, so I was like, yeah, content.
Um, and honestly, after when I had beaten the last of the generals, that I had to do Kartakaya, I didn't care about the rest of the game. Like, I got the resolution I wanted. And then, like, I didn't care about the final boss at all, so I didn't finish the game. I was like, nope, I'm done. I was just like, no more towers. I am done with towers.
Yeah. And like I'm saying, like Irene, your point is completely valid. Like the story input of defeating those four generals, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that in terms of its design. There was just a better way to do it, if you ask me. That's really all I want to bring up in that regard.
Like, I'm not gonna like die on the hill that those towers were the greatest things ever, but I'm going to say they just didn't bother me as much.
Yeah, and that's
Fair
fine.
enough.
And you know what? I'm also going to point out a little bit of hypocrisy to myself because I just playing through Act 2 of Trails of Cold Steel 2, there were actually four dungeons that needed to be cleared in order to progress the story at one point. But it was mixed in with so much other side content, and each dungeon was visually and intrinsically different from one another that it didn't feel nearly as
Repetitive, I think.
repetitive. Yeah, and in as they did with the Wild Arms games, or at least the ones that I've played. Maybe the other games in the series, when they do this, were done differently or better. I don't know because I
Yeah,
haven't.
because
But
I
just
can't
just from
remember.
my experience, from what I've seen, this is what I saw, and I just like I don't agree with this.
Yeah, I can't remember what they did for Wild Arms 3, but that game had this like basically the Wild Arms 3, the way it would work is that they went through like series of multiple, not like towers as you say, but like themed dungeons. So like you'd be going after multiple guardian runes or something like that. And all the dungeons would be different, but they'd have like a similar entrance to denote that they were a shrine, and then you'd go in the back and the trials would be different and the puzzles would be different.
Mm-hmm.
But they were like in sets almost. You could visit like multiple locations to get fragments of a key that would let you move on. And that was very central to like the way that the game was designed. And the locations were generally different enough that it wasn't like they were definitely unique locations in and of themselves. At least in 3. I can't remember how it went when you got close to the final boss. All I really remember about 3 is there's a point in the game where like it gets really difficult to figure out where you're supposed to go next, and that's not okay.
Yeah, and that's also like they trying this exploration mechanic in the world map on there was a nice idea. I think it wasn't executed properly in a lot of the games from what I saw. But
Yeah, it was like, oh,
I,
you've got like talk to the townspeople and they would give you hints about where to go, but like there was by that point you had opened up like God, how many fucking towns? I had to
yeah,
revisit all of them to figure out where I was going? No, come on.
yeah. Yeah, points for trying. It just they needed a little bit for execution. But all right, on that note, let's move on to Sky and let's see, which schoolhouse did you choose as your good dungeon design?
Yeah, so this is going to seem like a weird choice, but hear me out. I'm actually going to talk about Tartarus from Persona 3, which is basically the Tower of Shadows that during the daytime is the school that the protagonists go to. And only during the dark hour does it warp and transform into this giant tower that they have to climb. So, there's several things I liked about this, about the way they designed Tartarus. A, random floor designs. But this was a good thing. I mean, Tartarus is literally a moving, warping structure, right? So random dungeon design actually makes sense contextually. And while there was that random element, the individual floors of the tower were small enough that it didn't spin you in too many circles. It was easy enough to climb from floor to floor, which was really good considering, if you stayed on one floor too long, you were going to have death after your ass. Or the Reaper. So, I mean, the only standardized floors are really the ones with the elevators that allow you to go to and from the bottom floor.
Yeah, and I will also add, just in case, like those are interspersed at fixed points throughout the dungeon.
Correct.
As well.
So they had that little random element that made sense contextually, but put all these sort of safeguards into place. And if we're talking about cool dungeon design, the addition of death to stalk you if you stay on one floor too long, absolute genius.
And there were certain floors where death would come out faster, if I remember correctly. Like the floors with a lot of like the golden like hand enemies that would give you all the money and all of the experience if you killed them. Death would spawn way faster on those floors than in other floors.
Usually it took them about 10 minutes.
Yeah, on those floors it could take like as little as 5 if you weren't booting it.
Yeah.
There were some times you would actually get a floor where he's just there. And I remember this.
Very rare.
Yeah, it was very rare, but those floors, as soon as they happened, you bolted and looked for the stairs, especially if it wasn't endgame.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you'd walk on the floor and the chains, you'd hear the chains almost immediately.
Ka-chink, ka-chink, ka-chink.
And that was like, just as an atmospheric touch, listeners, Death's chains get more and more frequent the closer he is. So there's a sound, they build the tension with this like increasing frequency of clanking and dragging chains.
And it gives me the heebie-jeebies. It really does.
Mm-hmm.
Like as soon as you hear that, you run for the stairs. You get off that floor.
Yeah, because it's like, it might be fun to take on death. No. It is not fun to take on death with anything but an endgame spec'd party, and even then, you are not looking at a cakewalk.
No, you have to be ready for him, and he is ridiculously hard, and
It is possible to beat him.
it is possible. I mean, I say ridiculously hard in a game that also has, Elizabeth, but
Right?
yeah. But I mean that you also go into any fight with the Reaper kind of freaked out because you've been hearing the rattling of the chains.
Oh yeah, he psychs you out right away.
It psychs you out so hard, and it's amazing. It's just
I remember
Tartarus is a totally unique thing that way, and it's fantastic.
I remember one playthrough I played. Oh God, I was on the floor where death appeared, and I was like, "Oh my God, there are the stairs! I can see them!" And he comes around the corner, and he's between me and the stairs.
Yeah.
So what I did was I split. Like there's the function to split your party, so you're like all individuals.
Right.
I split the party and left Junpei to die. Went and bolted up the stairs with everybody else. It's the only way. He was between me and the stairs, and I was like, "Fuck, one of you's dying. It's just not gonna be me."
Yep.
And I rezzed him on the other side, and it was fine.
There you go. Yeah, because as soon as you transfer floors, you're safe again. He can't follow you between floors. That's why it's so effective to run for the stairs. But oh my goodness, does he ever psych you out?
He does.
Oh yeah.
So now for my bad idea. My bad idea is fairly epic. And it is basically all dungeons of the original Phantasy Star.
Wow, all of them. Tell us how you really feel, Sky.
Full disclosure, I really, really, really wanted to love this game. And a part of me still tries to, and I will try more in the series, but my gods, were the dungeons bad. So, none of the dungeons, of which there are many, are distinct from one another. So it's practically impossible to remember which one is which in a game where you basically have to wander around until you figure out where to go next. Literally, you walk into any dungeon and it's the same rolling, like, first-person stone masonry footage as you walk through the dungeon on repeat. I think they change the color every once in a while.
Ooh, luxury.
Luxury. There's nothing distinct about the interiors of any of the dungeons. I still haven't finished this game, but I got really far into it. And it just got more and more frustrating because there was more dungeons and you couldn't remember which one was which, ever. Because there was nothing distinct about the inside of them.
It's nice when every single, place that you're supposed to spend a lot of time to just, bleed into the sea of, samey.
Yes, exactly. And I know this is a very, very early RPG. This RPG is as old as I am, basically.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it was on the Mega Drive. But the dungeons are really hard to navigate when there's no distinct elements at all. Even when they added the map in the Sega Ages version, which is what I played.
So even with them, well, of course it would be. There's no landmarks to distinguish one from the other.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, here I have a map. Maybe it's this, random seeming configuration of rectangles, or maybe it's this random seeming configuration of rectangles that is slightly different.
And that's it exactly. The thing is, not only are the visuals not distinctive, the design is not distinctive. It feels randomly generated almost.
And not in a good way.
No, because the elements are used so weirdly. Why have random locked doors that lead nowhere of consequence? Not to mention the fact that those doors are pointless, as you find a generic dungeon key that opens most of those doors very early on in the game. Why have them there at all? it just makes you go into your menu to pull out the dungeon key. Honestly, I was willing to put up with it to a certain extent for a while because, it had this kind of cool sci-fi setting, kind of a Star Wars-y feel to it in places. One of the earliest games with a female protagonist. I mean, there was a lot to like there, and if they did a proper remake of it, I would be very interested.
Or hell, like, just make them randomized. I don't know what else.
Yeah.
But with different elements. I don't know.
Like, at first I could handle it because you only had so much of the map open, but the thing is, there's very little signposting.
yeah, there's no landmarks to tell where you are. It's like, well, maybe I'm
No,
here.
no, no.
Maybe I'm a.
Not what I'm getting at.
Oh, as
Game,
to where to go?
yeah. So you basically just have to wander around until you figure it out. Going into town X and talking to people, going into town Y and talking to people. And there are so many freaking dungeons that all look the same, and trying to keep track of which one is which and what's in them, like what actual plot things might be in them, which you might not have gotten on your first trip in if you had to say.
Oh, first trip, so you're going back.
Sometimes you have to because you weren't, because it's really non-linear, right? So sometimes you go to a place and you don't have the thing you need to progress, so you have to go back.
And it looks the same, so how do you know which one and that you had to go back to? Holy shit.
Like,
no, kill me, that's the worst. You win.
Yeah, I know, right? Like,
all the dungeons in Phantasy Star can ride Monstro into the sun.
And oh my god, did I want to like this game, because there are parts of it that are just fantastic, and for its age, it was beautiful. It has some of the coolest enemy sprite artwork. That's where all the love went in this game.
I mean, maybe they could have taken a little bit from their enemy design budget to put it into their dungeon making budget, but I don't know. That seems like a really weird decision to me.
Yeah. And it may have had to do with the engine they were using or something like that, but
I'd actually like to just make a quick correction. You were saying earlier that the game was released for the Mega Drive. It was actually before that. The game was released in. It was released in.
Oh, I'm sorry, the Master System.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes, sorry, that's what I meant. Mega Drive is the non-North American name for the Genesis.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I screwed that up. Yeah. Yeah, no, so it's even older than I said.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
It looks way better than a Master System game you would ever think. But it just doesn't put it in the places where it needs it. I mean, it was a game ahead of its time in a lot of ways, but it has aged so unbelievably poorly that, it's hard to recommend to anybody. And a huge part of that is honestly this dungeon design, because it makes it borderline unplayable. Even with the modifications they made with the Sega Ages version of adding the auto mapping and cutting the ridiculous encounter rate from the original and upping the experience and money you got.
Oh, so you know what? The encounter rate was so high. It's like, look at our monster sprites. Look at how great they are. Pay no attention to the same wallpaper you've seen 10,000 times. Look at the monster sprites. It's exactly what they were doing.
The design decisions are just mind-boggling. So, yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say about the Dungeons of the original Phantasy Star.
It certainly was a lot.
Yeah.
Sky wins. This is the worst. I take it back. Monstro is not the worst whale.
Yep. I was listening to you going oh.
Just wait. Just wait.
It's coming.
And me, I'm like, okay. I'm like, Wow, that sounds awful. Excuse me while I go play Monstro again for the 10th time so I don't have to deal with that, whatever the fuck that is. I will be I will take my Monstro and like it.
Yeah, I know, right? It's just like, be thankful for your Monstro.
Because it's only the one dungeon. What if all of Kingdom Hearts was Monstro?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. I think, you know what? I love Square Enix and they've made some truly iconic video games, but if every single dungeon was Monstro, I think they would be out of business.
Well, probably.
They would have folded after the release of the first Kingdom Hearts.
All right, now that I've broken some brains, why don't we wrap it up?
Yeah.
I'm thinking so. That I think we need some time to recover. If if you got booze, now's the time. So, all right. Well, let's. We're gonna wrap up now, and I want to hear what you guys think about dungeons you've either really really liked or really really have not liked. And you can tell me on all of the social medias that I have. That includes Twitter at Billionaires XP. It includes Instagram at Rayfe, or you can join into one of my Wednesday night Twitch streams, also under Rayfe, and that's 7 p.m. Eastern on Wednesdays again. Sky, where can everyone find you?
I'm at SkyKnightXP on Twitter and Twitch. I'm also at skyknight.xp on Instagram. And my Twitch streams are on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Excellent. And Irene, where are you going to be?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at irogue_XP. Same address on Twitch, where I stream on Thursdays at 7 p.m.
And as always, we'll have a transcript up for our episode within the next day or so of release. And that is yep. And that is courtesy of our XP Hobo Hannah Bard, so we appreciate that. And you can find that at xpbillionaires.wordpress.com. And lastly, and never the least, in any way, shape, or form, but if you guys like what we're doing, we'd love to get a donation from you through our coffee page. That's coffee.com/xpbillionaires. And again, if you guys can't donate or you just don't want to donate, but still love what we're doing, totally fine. What we'd ask is just share it with people you know, people who are going to like what we have to say. So if you do that, that helps us just as much. All right, we're gonna sign off for this week. We'll catch you next week, and keep gaming. Otherwise, I'll give you an earful. All right, we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.